Hi everybody, it's Az here from HeelvsBabyface. Patch 7.3.5 has been with us for a little while now, and that is pretty much it. That is a wrap on the content for Legion. I don't think we're going to see anything of particular worth until the pre-expansion patch leading into Battle for Azeroth. So with that said, over the course of the next few weeks, I'm going to bring a new series of videos which I'm calling Deconstructing Legion, where I'm going to take different aspects of this expansion and go through them. Go through what I think Blizzard did correctly, what I think they did incorrectly, where things could be tweaked, where things could be changed, and of course, moving into Battle for Azeroth, kind of like the state of the game when it comes to relation of that topic. And the topic that we're going to discuss today is story. Because believe it or not, the World of Warcraft is actually an MMORPG. And you will actually, and I don't say that sarcastically either, I say that legitimately, because you do not understand how many messages I've had over the years of people saying, oh, Az, you've just got to stop talking about narrative and story. The World of Warcraft isn't an RPG anymore, it's just an MMO, you're going to have to deal with it. And I'm kind of like, since when? You know, where did Blizzard come out with the announcement that this is no longer an MMORPG, it's just an MMO? They never did. It's an MMORPG. Just because story might be neglected and just because narrative might not be at the forefront of the game anymore doesn't mean that it isn't an aspect which really should be looked at. And in actual fact, one could argue that Blizzard tried a lot in Legion to actually make narrative more pronounced within the game. They tried to make story and stories in general more important than they have been over the course of quite a few expansions now. I would argue Wrath of the Lich King was the last time that we really saw a juicy, meaty story in the World of Warcraft. But I want to kind of like take the main storyline here, and that is the fact that the main story of Legion was the Legion's invasion of Azeroth. I will delve into some of the side aspects of that, but what we really do need to look at is how successful was this expansion in bringing that over? Well, if we go straight back in to patch 7.0, the release patch of this expansion, I think Legion started off from a narrative perspective very, very strongly indeed. I think the arrival at the Broken Shore was one of the best kind of arrivals in an expansion since, I would say, Mists of Pandaria. Arriving at Mists of Pandaria was a really cool experience, whether you were Horde or Alliance. You actually got to have a really explosive dynamic beginning to the expansion. And I think when you hit the Broken Shore and did the Broken Shore scenario, it really did give you an aspect and an idea and a feeling that the Legion were here, and they were here in force. And not only that, and I'm not talking just about the general aesthetic of what the Broken Isles looked like, and particularly the Broken Shore, which was all consumed now by the Legion. We also saw some very impactful aspects of storyline being told from the very start. We get to see Tyrion Fordring taking his bow, being killed with the help of Gul'dan. After that, Vol'jin succumbed to the Legion too, killing off one of the major players within the Horde hierarchy. And of course, Varian Rin, who probably got a much more heroic death than Vol'jin, also bit the bullet as well, sacrificing himself so that the Alliance could escape the Broken Shore and make it back to Stormwind to regroup. So from a starting perspective, I thought this was superb. Legitimately superb. It really set the story and it really set the tone for what you hoped the expansion would be. You got a feeling that the Legion were legitimate. This wasn't a force to be taken lightly. They showed that they could cause significant damage, not only in casualty terms, because we saw, of course, a lot of dead Argent Crusaders and, you know, a lot of destruction around the place. But with people like Tyrion, people like Varian, and people like Vol'jin being killed off immediately, you were also concerned that throughout the course of the expansion, you were going to see more sacrifice. You were going to see more loss in this battle. Ironically, then, this is where Legion really seemed to just grind to a halt from a narrative perspective. It was as if the main storyline had been put on hold, and now it was our turn just to return to the Broken Isles and start to level and do the incidental storylines which occurred in the various zones. And this really kind of confused me, because we'd had such a strong start at the beginning of this expansion. We'd had such a killer moment, literally, from the Legion, that when we actually returned back to the Broken Isles, when Dalaran was teleported across and we all arrived, I was half expecting Dalaran to almost be under siege from the beginning of this expansion. We'd obviously have to try and do something to keep Dalaran protected in the skies, and, you know, we would then go off and perform whatever duties we needed to do in the various zones, leveling up. That, of course, never happened. When we went back to the Broken Isles after the Broken Shore incident, everything was quiet. Everything was rather serene. If you started off leveling in Stormheim, you probably won't have even come across any of the Legion at all. We had a very interesting side story with Greymane and Sylvanas, but other than that, we had, you know, the stuff with Odin, and I myself particularly wasn't that invested in the Helya Odin stuff, and it had no real bearing on where the game went forward as a main story anyway. High Mountain, again, you would barely come across anything Legion related. You'd come across a few corrupted tribes, but other than that, the story of High Mountain was really the banding together of the various tribes. Val Shirar, I thought, was actually some excellent storytelling in Val Shirar. Not necessarily major storytelling, but it was a zone that built up towards the first raid, and I think it built up towards the first raid very well indeed, with the story of Ysera and the corruption within the Emerald Nightmare and the corruption of the Emerald Dream. I thought that was dealt with very well indeed, and not every zone, of course, had to have everything to do with Legion or the Burning Legion, but Val Shirar had its own self-contained, in my view, side story, leading very nicely into the first raid indeed. And then Azuna, well, again, it was a decent enough story. None of the stories which are being told are particularly bad or anything like that, but nothing really that kind of pushed the threat of the Legion. And this was the major thing. After posing such a threat at the start of the expansion, why had they just suddenly stopped? Another answer to this potential question could be that Blizzard wanted all focus to go on their new idea, their new piece of content, which was a top-level narrative zone in Suramar. And I'm a huge lover of the Suramar zone. I think it was absolutely fantastic. Not necessarily the way that the story was dished out. I really didn't like the fact that the storyline would be gated either by time or by reputation or by elements like that. But I did really enjoy the storyline, and I did really enjoy the characters and where they took that. And of course, that did have a much greater connection to the Legion because of the surrendering of Suramar to the Burning Legion to allow them to live on and also still obtain their power from the Nightwell, etc., etc. So that element in itself was good. However, it didn't make a lot of sense to the main story. And you've got to just think about this logically, and you've got to look at it from a very basic perspective. The story is the Legion are invading Azeroth. Not the Legion are invading the Broken Isles. And one could argue that it's kind of felt like for 99% of the expansion, the Legion invading the Broken Shore, just a very tiny part of the Broken Isles. No, the whole aspect of the story is the Legion actually invading Azeroth itself. But let me just backtrack for a moment, because before Legion was even released, we of course had the Legion pre-expansion patch. And this was rather similar, not exactly, but rather similar to the one that we had before Wrath of the Lich King released. But in this instance, the Legion itself, the Burning Legion, were attacking various points within Kalimdor or the Eastern Kingdom. So you could either see a warning go up on your chat channels, or you could just look at your map and you will see where the invasion was taking place. You could fly over there. There would be loads of people fighting, loads of Legion NPCs that were spawning really, really quickly, depending on how many people were there. And although the actual physical content wasn't, mind-blowing, it was awesome to get together with huge groups of people, defeat the invasion at the time. You'd get yourself some rewards, and you could use them for whatever, little bits of gear, little bits of toys and goods and whatnot. So that was before the actual expansion had released. Suddenly, when we get the meat and potatoes, when the expansion does release and we are now full out war with the Legion, nothing. No invasion of Azeroth, and it feels so insular just to be bound to the Broken Isles. Now, I'm not for one moment saying that Blizzard should, abandon their brand new continents to focus on a fight completely around Azeroth. I'm not saying that for one moment. But what I am saying is, you are dealing with an expansion where its focus is the Legion invading Azeroth. Not just the Broken Shore, not just the Broken Isles, Azeroth. Not one tiny little aspect, not the continent, the whole of the world. And yet we don't seem to get that. And from this excellent start, from this start that set up so much, which kind of put us on edge, that made us think, oh my god, we could lose anyone at any moment to the Legion. Suddenly, all of that tension, all of that worry, all of that concern was gone because the Legion weren't doing anything. And Blizzard, I don't think, quite understand. I think they get so insular when it comes to creating a new continent that they have to put all of the content which they're going to do for the expansion in there. Right, we're going to Pandaria. Everything's going to be on Pandaria. It doesn't have to be like that at all. And if I could just bring in some of the side stories now for Legion. When we were doing our class order missions, these are the things which I found the most interesting aspect of Legion, with the various stories. I know they were time consuming, but they were really good. I mean, for the most part, they were good. Some, didn't quite hit the right note, but as a concept, I think they were an excellent idea. And for instance, the Death Knight one, which takes you back to Icecrown Citadel, and you reuse aspects of Icecrown Citadel. The same, I believe, with the Frost Mage. I think it takes you back to Icecrown Citadel as well. And you have these little traps and little scenarios to get through with your story mission, utilising these older assets. And it makes you feel connected to the world. But that's just by the by. Because this is a grander story, and the grander story is the Legion attacking Azeroth. And suddenly, it doesn't feel like a threat. The Legion no longer feel like a threat. I no longer feel like we're going to lose somebody big. I feel as if somebody was going to die, if an Anduin or a Sylvanas was going to perish, it would almost now feel contrived, because the threat of the Legion seems nigh on non-existent. And I want to take you back even further now, before the release of the expansion, before the release of the pre-expansion patch. I want to take you back to December of 2015, when I am on the alpha or the beta for Legion, and I'm flying around the world thinking they've got to be putting Legion things in Azeroth. They have to. The Legion are invading Azeroth. And lo and behold, when I flew over Ironforge and I got through to the wetlands, I was suddenly greeted by all these Legion constructs in the wetlands. Now, initially, I thought to myself, oh, are they just fiddling with assets? You know, having a look at what assets they have to play with, and they're just placing them in the, in the wetlands to test. And it didn't appear to be that way, because although there were some Legion constructs, we actually had pockets of Legion attacking villages. The villagers were dead. The Legion were in those villages. If you went around the whole of the wetlands, the map itself was positioned as if this was some sort of war event going on. Not necessarily an invasion event, but some sort of war event going on, where you would actually have to physically go in and contribute towards this war event. And then if you went to the other side of the wetlands, then there was actually base camps for the Alliance, where you could get yourself into tanks and physically go out and use the tanks against the Legion's constructions and the Legion forces. So it really looked like, before Legion was going to be released, it certainly looked like Blizzard were genuinely looking at putting content on Azeroth itself that made you feel as if the Legion were trying to set root in Azeroth as well, in the Eastern Kingdoms, in Kalimdor. I'd imagine they would probably go on to do one in Pandaria and most likely Northrend as well. But for some reason, I don't know why, for some reason, this never came to pass. And this is a huge, huge miss, because this is the right idea. What they were doing here is the right idea. Now, they might have had an idea for a plan to perform here, and it didn't quite work. But they were at least had the right idea that there should be fighting going on the actual physical body, the physical continents of Pandaria, Eastern Kingdoms, Kalimdor, Northrend, and obviously Outland. Outland's got nothing to do with this, so you don't have to bother yourself with Outland. But the physical continents on Azeroth itself. So they had the right idea before the expansion released, and yet they never pushed forward with it. Now, we've got to take a bit of a break. Not in the video, but we've got to take a bit of a break with me, because I left the game in patch 7.0. And the reason why I left the World of Warcraft was more to do with Warlords of Draenor than it was to do with Legion. Legion was kind of the straw that broke the donkey's back, and we're talking about, it was the physical content of Legion that got me, not anything else. So I'll go into more of that when I do the content video. But needless to say, I left the game for 1 year. And I think in that 1 year period, I returned for like 2 to 3 weeks. After 6 months, I did my 1 week in WoW, and because you have to sub for a month, you can't just sub for a week. I think I also did a little bit of recording here or there for the next couple of weeks afterwards, just so I could get some secret videos up for people. But my heart wasn't in the game then, and so there was no point in continuing. And so that 6 months became a year. Then I saw the classic announcement at BlizzCon, and suddenly I was just like, oof, and it really sparked me back to life. But you have to understand that during this 1 year period that I was away from the game, I wasn't following any WoW news. I wasn't interested in any WoW news. I wasn't watching any WoW videos. I wasn't watching any WoW streams. I was complete and utterly away from the game. I had no idea what was coming in patches. I had no idea what they were doing as regards to content. So when I decided to return, obviously the only thing that I did know is when I returned after 6 months, there was the broken shore, and I was just like, so when I returned after a year, I had a couple of ideas into in my head what I thought the game would be like. And I thought after returning, there would be physical content on the Eastern Kingdoms or Kalimdor, at least those two continents, that was going to be Legion specific. The Legion had taken root in X Zone, Y Zone, and, you know, we were going to do blah, blah, blah to try and get them out. And yet, when I returned after a year going through patch 7.1, 7.2, and 7.3, in terms of story, because this isn't a content video, in terms of story, it had gone nowhere. The Legion invasion had literally gone nowhere. 7.1 didn't bring any further real developments in the Legion story. It added more to the Suramar storyline, and I actually did all of that on the PTR before I left Legion, because the PTR for 7.1 was already up. So I physically did all of that and did rather enjoy that. But actually the Legion invading Azeroth, what is going on? There isn't any invasion. There is no invasion by the Legion. And this is where we get to something which is rather hilarious. The Broken Shore, of course, brought nothing to the table in terms of real story. We were taking the pillars of creation and sticking them in the tomb of Sargeras. That's all I really got from it. In terms of story, there really wasn't too much going on. But what was hilarious, and I know this might sound a bit cruel, but it's just a fact and that you're going to have to deal with. The storyline had gone so nowhere that at the end of patch 7.2, Illidan, who's proving to be the main character of the expansion, yes, there will be a video on characters. Illidan was so bored of the storyline of this expansion, and Illidan was so bored of the fact that the Legion weren't doing anything in their invasion, that Illidan decided, I'm actually going to drag Argus, the home world of the Burning Legion, through a portal to Azeroth. Because if they're not going to do anything, we're going to go to them instead. So if you think about it from that perspective, that's exactly what happened. Between 7.0 and the end of 7.2, the Legion did nothing. No invasion of Azeroth, nothing. We all just had a nice little campfire in Dalaran. We wandered around, did a little questing, did a little bit of this, did a little bit of Suramar. Nothing happened whatsoever. So Illidan just got pissed off and dragged Argus through a portal to Azeroth itself and said, right, can we fucking do something, please? And then, of course, even with Argus arriving, did the Legion attack Azeroth? No, we attacked Argus. And when I say attacked, again, the flimsy nature of the storytelling just made us arrive on Argus and then kill 12 demons and blow up 3 cannons. There wasn't any impetus. The story's just completely stalled. And this is frustrating, and this is sad, really, because there was some really good storytelling. I've already said how much I enjoyed the class missions. Another aspect of the storytelling that I really enjoyed was the Greymane Sylvanas stuff in Stormheim. It was really engaging. And it was really engaging because it felt, for the first time in a long time, that there was legitimate animosity between the Horde and the Alliance. Sylvanas had killed Greymane's son, Liam, way back in Cataclysm. Greymane had never had his retribution for that. Sylvanas had a new agenda now. She wasn't bothered with that. It didn't concern her. She was being chased down by Greymane, but she had her own agenda. She wanted to get the lanterns. She wanted to be able to make more Forsaken. Greymane took that away from her. She took his child. He's taken her ability to have children, and I'm using inverted commas here. So there was some awesome storytelling there, and it ended in a very interesting position that you were very keen for it to pick up. And when I returned back to the game after a year and I said, can somebody tell me, I was streaming and I said, can somebody please tell me, where can I pick up the next part of the Greymane Sylvanas story. And that's when I was told, oh no, Blizz stopped it. They said they're going to pick it up some other time. Maybe the next expansion. But it looks like aspects of that storyline is going to be continued in the book. And this is another problem which we'll get to in a short while. So in all the time that I was away from the game, the storyline never advanced from 7.0. There was some great storytelling with Suramar, and there was some great storytelling with your Class Order Hall storylines, campaigns. There was some good storyline in some of the zones. Val Shirar I've highlighted as a key one because I thought it did a great job of leading into the first raid. Much better job than Stormheim, because Stormheim wasn't actually created to lead in to the Halls of Valor raid, because the Halls of Valor raid wasn't planned till later on. And so that's why it felt very shoehorned in. But Val Shirar had always been created with that in mind, and that's why I think it flowed very well indeed. So there's pockets of decent storytelling around the place, and yet the most important aspect of the story, which is the main storyline, is non-existent. It's gone nowhere. The Legion haven't done anything. We haven't really done anything. And it got to the point where Illidan got so bored he dragged the homeworld through because he said, can we just get on and, can we get on with something, please? So, this is problematic with the World of Warcraft. When you're releasing an expansion, and your expansions are promising something because of the title of what they are. Wrath of the Lich King. It's promising the Wrath of the Lich King's, he's coming at you. And he was. We had some great tussles with the Lich King in Northrend, and it culminated in a fantastic battle at the top of Icecrown Citadel. The Burning Crusade, it lived up to exactly what it was. We went through the Dark Portal, through to the Destroyed Outland. We joined forces with the people who had gone before us, who were stranded on the other side, meeting back up with a certain Archmage Khadgar. And of course that led to Illidan's demise. Even Cataclysm. Cataclysm did exactly what it said on the tin. Cataclysm destroyed lots of parts of Azeroth and changed lots of parts of Azeroth. It lived up to its billing. Mists of Pandaria, it's a little bit more ambiguous with its title, and I could argue that its story wasn't particularly great either. But that's when we start to go a little bit off kilter. That's when the storylines aren't living up to what you expect. And then Warlords of Draenor. We don't even want to touch that one with a barge pole. But when you're saying Legion, and you can see that there's definitely a much bigger effort from the Blizzard crew to actually make Legion something, as opposed to what Warlords was, which was absolutely nothing. The storyline didn't live up to that billing of Legion. The Legion are invading Azeroth. It didn't live up to that one bit. Now, before you all start saying, oh, I have to be so negative, by laying out facts. This doesn't necessarily have to have a sad ending. This story can end with a happy ending, but it has to get worse, unfortunately, before it gets better. Because of all the missteps with the main storyline in Legion, it's going to go a little bit further as well, because we do already know that there's going to be a book released that's going to bridge Legion into Battle for Azeroth, written by Christy Golden. Now, I got to stress this, I've stressed this many times, I have nothing against Christy Golden. For all intents and purposes, I've heard that she's an excellent author. And I've no reason to doubt that whatsoever. And I think I actually have had an exchange with her on Twitter, and she was lovely. She was an absolutely lovely person. So I don't have a problem with her specifically. I do, however, have a problem with Blizzard releasing narrative in books that is in current continuity. because this is exactly what the game is screaming out for. This is what the game needs. It needs this narrative. So now let's flip that arch enemy horrible thing onto its flip side and say, well, the good news is Christie Golden is actually going to be involved with the narrative and the storytelling of Battle for Azeroth. And hopefully, now that somebody's in control of that, who does know how to piece together a story, that does understand the nature of how a story has to flow through, and how there has to be a proper bona fide plan in place about where one thing leads to another. One thing, of course, we always hear from Blizzard is, oh, we're not going to do this piece of content anymore because we've had another idea about this. There doesn't really seem to be a proper plan. It's just like they seem to only work in patches. All right, we're starting this patch where it's going to go. It's as if their storyline says, Legion invade, patch 7.3, Argus is defeated. But we know for a fact that that wasn't the case when the expansion started, because 7.3 was actually an idea which came later on. But never mind. But it does definitely look as if they don't really have a true idea about where the narrative's going to go. Hopefully, Christie Golden can bring that to the table. She can say, right, this is the narrative of Battle for Azeroth. This is going to lead, A is going to lead to B, that's going to lead to C, that's going to lead to D, that's going to lead to E. And E's going to be the end. And then, of course, Blizzard can create their contents focused around that, and can create this arcing storyline and branching storyline as well, based off this plan by Christie Golden. But the main storyline of Legion is just lost. It just lost itself. It didn't go anywhere. It didn't bring that threat that the Legion should have brought, and the Legion really, really should have been that kind of extinction level threat. This is a group of people that annihilate worlds for shits and giggles. They annihilate worlds purely for resources, so they can go off and annihilate other worlds. The Legion are an extinction level threat, and they barely got off the broken shore. And that's not how the expansion should have gone. We should have been fighting in Kalimdor. We should have been protecting Orgrimmar. We should have been fighting outside of the gates of Stormwind, keeping them at bay. We should have had all these true elements of an extinction level threat that the Legion should have imposed on us, and it never happened. And they felt non-existent as an enemy. They felt non-threatening by the end. It felt like we were fully in control the whole time. We ended up pulling their planet through to kick them in the nuts. And even the ending with Sargeras, stabbing Silithus, giving that zone a much needed overhaul. Even that, which is a cool visual for sure, a really cool visual, couldn't make up for the lack of threat that the Legion had possessed throughout the course of the expansion. So moving into Battle for Azeroth, with Christie Golden at the helm of the story, I really do expect great things from the next expansion in terms of narrative. And I don't think it's unfair of me to want that or think that. I think when you have somebody who has done so many books now within the WoW universe, who clearly understands the characters, who clearly understands how to construct story, this should be a wonderful expansion when it comes to storytelling. And I really, really think that there shouldn't be any excuses for it not to be. So there we go. The first part of my Deconstructing Legion comes to an end of story. That's done. More videos to come, of course. We'll deal with content, we'll deal with characters, and we'll also probably deal with some other aspects as well. So I hope you enjoyed the vid. If you did, do get a thumbs up and also subscribe to my channel. Follow me on social media and Twitch for live streaming. Links there in the description box down below. And I'll be back with some more stuff very soon. You take care. Bye for now.